In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 241 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is choices. Our quote of the day comes to us from Jeff Bezos. Everything you are comes from your choices. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode. As an avid basketball fan, I vividly remember the gambling scandal that deeply impacted the NBA back in 2007. Tim Donaghy joins us today as our guest to discuss the choices he made that cost him his NBA refereeing job and ultimately led to him spending 15 months in jail. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Tim, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to bring it today?
Absolutely.
So as we talked about before we went live, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I know you have a no-quit story of your own, and I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind briefly just touching on it with us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was in a situation where I had a great job in the NBA. I was doing extremely well. And unfortunately, I made some bad choices and got involved in gambling. And with that, I started to pass information along to people that were associated with organized crime. And it was discovered over a Gambino wiretap. And because of that, I was charged with gambling and wire fraud and did 15 months in a federal prison.
So I think the story is interesting, and how you touched on it is that it was actually found out because the FBI was monitoring some other individuals. And I think it was just crazy how it happened as far as what it did. But I wanted to ask you, during those 15 months in prison, what was the toughest time?
Every day, just getting through every day. There was one time where I got attacked in prison, and a guy who claimed to be associated with the Gambino crime family took a paint rolling pole and hit me across my knee, which I've since had 2 operations on. So that probably was the lowest and hardest point, was that day after that attack.
What was the toughest time when you left jail and now you're back in the real world? What was the hardest transition for you?
I think just trying to get a job and finding out what I was going to do with my life. When you have a felony on your record, it's tough. People really don't want to hire you. So that was my biggest concern.
So do you still watch or follow the NBA at all today?
Sure, I watched it. I watched a little bit of the Sixers-Boston game last night.
Knowing you're a big Philly guy, right?
Right.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about your movie and coming out, which comes out November 1st, and I wanted to kind of get your perspective on it, is I read that initially you were not in favor of the movie, but after seeing it and hearing more about it and realizing that the lessons it has in it, I hear and see that now you're supporting it. So I just wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind expanding on it a bit.
Yeah, in the movie, they do a great job. Scott Wolf plays Tommy Martino. Will Sassa plays Batista, and Eric Mabius plays myself. And there's a great message there in that we all made some terrible choices. We all did some really dumb things, and we kind of, lost our way a little bit. And it just shows how great our families were, that they stood by us and helped us through a very difficult situation. I think that's the message that's in the movie that really hits me hard. And I think when people look at it, I think they're going to probably make better choices, because if you don't make the right choice, you can see what happened to us.
So wanted to expand on that for a second in regards to the gambling and betting, and seeing the previews for it and following your story and reading your book, initially my thought process was what my information, albeit limited, was that you got involved in with get betting on some games, but doing it more so out of a hobby as far as something that you felt that you could do, and then obviously it escalated. What advice do you have for others or people that are getting involved either in gambling or betting, and any advice to sway them away from it?
Well, if it's not being used as a form of entertainment and you're getting in too deep and you don't have money to cover what you're doing and you're chasing bets, I think you need to take a step back and realize that that may not be for you. When people get out of control, they do some crazy stuff and end up stealing or taking out loans and going to the casinos and signing, markers and stuff. So I think if it's something that is controlling you, you have to step away from it.
I love that. I think that's the thing that people I think miss often is it's okay to have hobbies and it's okay to be interested in different things. And I have a lot of friends that do different gambling, whether it's fantasy leagues and things like that. But I think you hit it best is if that thing controls you, I think that's when it becomes something that's dangerous.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it certainly controlled me, and it pushed me into making some poor choices that not only affected me, but affected the people that I love the most, and that's my family. And that's really portrayed well in the movie.
How is the relationship with your family today?
Terrific. All my kids are living with me. I speak to my mom and my dad, on a consistent basis, and things couldn't be better.
I love that. So, interesting question because I'm just curious from your perspective. What was the best part about being an NBA referee for as long as you did it?
The excitement of being on the floor with the greatest athletes on the world, and it's something that pays very well. And I was able to support my family very well doing it. And you're traveling first class, staying in nice hotels, and refereeing the greatest game in the world.
I recently read an interview with you, and you talked about how someone you were asked, and I know you've been asked many times about whether you feel that not only are NBA games and professional games still being fixed or manipulated. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that for a second.
I think that they're definitely during playoff times programming and training these referees to go out and look for certain things, and it always favors that team that's down in the series. So, the bottom line is they want these games to go 5, 6, and hopefully 7 games, and they do whatever they can do to try and push that in that direction.
So we often talk about accountability with our company, No Quit Living, and I wanted to ask and get your perspective on what the word accountability means to you.
Taking ownership of problems and mistakes that are made in your life. I think it's easy to always blame somebody else, but if you make yourself accountable and you try to correct the mistakes that you made and learn from it, I think that you're holding yourself accountable.
No, I think that's a good point. And one of the things we talk about is different life lessons. And assuming you were able to go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would that advice have been?
Stay away from the certain people and don't start gambling. It was in my contract that I wasn't supposed to place a bet of any kind, and I would have hoped that I would have stood by that and not went down the road that I did.
So, interesting question I always ask everybody is if I had the opportunity to offer you dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick and why?
My mom. I love my mom to death, and she's been there for me from beginning to end. And she's somebody that every opportunity I had, I'd want to be with.
That would be a good dinner. And I have to. One of the things we talk about is the definition of one word. And I was curious if you had to define yourself, but you could only use one word. What word would you pick?
Flawed. I think definitely I've made some poor choices, and I feel like I've learned from them, and it definitely humbled me and made me a better person. But I think we're all flawed in different ways, and once we realize that we're all have the ability to make mistakes, and as long as we learn from it, I'm very fortunate that people have been very forgiving for me.
I want to touch on that for a second because I think that in life and some of the most successful people that we all see and look up to, whether they're in sports, entertainment, business, or some ways politics or religion, I think we look at that person at their highest, at their peak, and I think the reality of the story is so many people fail and so many people fall down, but it's during those struggles. And I think it's the whole concept of the second chance. So I want to just get your perspective on what you feel success means to you and how what you've encountered in the past has led you to where you are today.
Success to me is when I see that my kids are happy and healthy and successful. I think as a parent, we all live through our kids. We want to provide for them the best way we can, and we want them to be happy and successful. And that's one thing that brings me a enormous amount of joy. And when I see sadness or problems in their life, it affects my life.
And on the in regards to some of the lessons that you've learned and some of the things that you've done, I guess for our listeners out there, for those people that are looking to make amends or looking to kind of get back from a struggle, do you have any advice for them as far as if there are people that you've hurt in the past or people that they've hurt in the past? What's the best way to get through and in essence apologize and humble yourself to be able to move on not only for them but also for yourself?
I think everybody is forgiving, and when you go to somebody and you admit that you made a mistake, and hopefully let them know that you learned for it. I don't think there's too many people in this world that would not give somebody a second chance under those circumstances. It's when you keep going back and making the same mistake that I think somebody would turn your way. So I think just accepting responsibility and apologizing and moving in a different direction is what would be needed.
Want to just touch on your book for a second. Obviously, we touched on the movie, and we'll touch on that again in a second. But for our listeners that would like to find out a little bit more about your story and our avid readers, wanted to just ask if you wouldn't mind just telling them a little bit about your book as well.
Yeah, my book's Personal Foul. It's on Amazon.com. It was a one bestseller on Amazon. It's done very well, and it talks about the entire 2007 NBA gambling scandal from start to finish. What I did, how I did it, who was involved, and how it affected my life. So it's another cautionary tale that I think people can look at and understand how important choices are.
I'm glad you touched on that because I think that's such an important aspect of the best way to learn. And I think, as I said before, we look at these people at their peak or their highest level of success, and everybody wants to emulate that. But the reality is that people struggle along the way, and I think with every struggle or every failure, in essence, you learn, you become stronger, you become smarter, you become more disciplined and dedicated to whatever that skill or craft or objective is. And I think we learn so much from others, and I appreciate you touching on your book, and definitely would recommend to our listeners to take a read. It's an awesome book. I've read it myself. So wanted to jump back again to the movie, and if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about your involvement with it, but more importantly, if there's anything you want to share about it, because I know it does release on November 1st.
Yeah, the movie is called Inside Game. It comes out November 1st. We have three great actors in Eric Mabius, Scott Wolf, and Will Sassa, who play Martino, Batista, and myself. I think they do a great job with the film, taking everybody through the entire scandal from start to finish and show what we did and how we did it, how we communicated, how the FBI got involved, and how everything was exposed and what we had to do moving forward to uh, basically get through the entire situation.
I can't wait. It comes out again November 1st, and it's called Inside Game. One of the things that a question that I wrote down, and I'm curious to get your answer to it, is it's very difficult to admit fault, and more importantly, it's difficult to put yourself out there. And I think the word that comes to mind for me is vulnerability. And I think not only with your book, but the movie, you're being extremely vulnerable and you're exposing what happened. And I think the reality of the situation is this story and this movie and your book will hopefully help people not only just with the gambling and betting and some of those poor decisions, but more importantly, I just loved how you've touched on a couple times the whole second chances thing, because I think that's such an important part of life. And I think people often want to point blame and point fingers as opposed to trying to move forward. So how did you get or come to the realization that you had to accept this, but more importantly, you had to become vulnerable to get to that point?
I think the bottom line is I felt guilty for what I did, how I did it, and a lot of people that I betrayed, and that guilt was enormous for me. And the first step in uh, you know you dealing with your problems is admitting that you had one and you did one. And with that, I've been very fortunate that we live in a very forgiving society, and people have been very nice to me and forgiving, and I'm very grateful for that. And when you have 4 daughters at home, you want to do the best you can for them at each and every turn, and that's what it's all about for me.
Are you involved in any gambling organizations, Gamblers Anonymous or anything like that? Have you given back in any of those ways as well?
I have been involved in Gamblers Anonymous in the past, and there's also situations where people would send me emails or Facebook messages and said that they've had a problem, and I've talked to them and put them in the right direction to get help.
That's awesome, and I think that's something that we often touch on and try to touch on in our show is the idea and the component of paying it forward. And I think so many people have learned lessons, and we've also been fortunate to have different successes. And I think to your point about being a forgiving society and country, I think it's also so rewarding when you can pay it forward to others in that regard.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's what it's all about, helping others and giving people a hand when they need it and they're down rather than giving them a foot. And, a lot of times I felt like I got that foot, but, I guess it was well-deserved from, what I had done. But, I like to give somebody a hand and not a foot.
I love it. I've actually never heard that analogy, the hand versus the foot. And I think it's very ironic and sad in many ways, because I think in our society, especially in our country today, it seems like most people want to give that foot first and foremost, and then it's almost like the hand is an afterthought. I think it's completely flipped around, where I think it should be offering somebody that hand first and saying, how can I help you? Or I realize you're in pain or you need help, as opposed to offering the foot.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think that would make us much better if a lot of people would use that in their life.
No, I love it. I'm definitely going to use that, and I'll give you credit for that.
I appreciate it.
So we're going to switch lanes here into what we call our hot seat questions. And the only thing we ask of you is that you just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Sure, go ahead.
So if you had one last meal and you could choose absolutely anything, what would you choose?
Steak.
Favorite sport?
Basketball.
All-time favorite team?
Championship Sixers.
Favorite smell?
Perfume.
All-time favorite movie?
Goodfellas.
Do you have an all-time favorite book?
My own personal foul.
Awesome. Do you have an all-time favorite quote?
No, I don't, to be honest with you.
Favorite singer, group, or band?
I'm not really into singing and music, so I'll probably have to pass on that.
And if you were stuck in a foxhole and you could have one person to have your back, who would you pick?
My mom, because I'll tell you, no matter what, every time I turn around with not even all the mistakes I made, every time she's been right there.
That's awesome. It sounds like you guys have a very special relationship.
Absolutely.
So for our listeners that are interested in following up and finding out more about you, are you active on social media, and do you have a following for them a way for them to connect with you?
Absolutely. I'm on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, Tim Donaghy, the number 2. And, you can go on InsideGameMovie.com and look everything up about the movie and get tickets and see where the movie's playing.
Awesome. And then the last question we have for you, Tim, is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Absolutely. Choices are important because not only do they affect yourself, but the people you love the most, and that's your family. So I think moving forward, we all need to make the best choices possible and not be in a position to harm the people that we love.
I appreciate it. So, Tim, thank you so much, not only for your time, and definitely for our listeners. I recommend that you check out his book, which is available on Amazon, and also check out his movie, which comes out November 1st. So thank you, Tim, and hopefully we can connect again soon.
Yes, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to episode number 241. Tim Donaghy has quite a story, from his NBA career to jail, as a best-selling author, and now with a movie coming out on November 1st. The one thing that really impressed me with today's interview was that Tim owned the decisions and choices he made, and he talks about how they hurt other people. I clearly don't condone his actions, but most people never fully admit or own their faults. Tim shared something that I found to be very interesting. He spoke about helping others and giving them a hand as opposed to giving them your foot. My closing thoughts deal with second chances. As the host of the No Quit Living podcast, clearly I believe in getting back up when we fall, continuing to fight after we've failed. I would like to ask you to think about the idea and concept of second chances. If and when someone has hurt you or made a mistake, how do you deal with them if they have honestly apologized and truly tried to make amends? And what about people that have not apologized or own their mistakes? As you go for your greatness today, I would like to end today's episode with something that I've been saying recently. We rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.